starstruck. I mean, obviously. But yeah, I'd read some poems. The first poem that I'd read is titled Wine Glass, and it's the first poem in the book, Your Crib, My Qibla. Wine glass. When your mother found strands of your hair hung up in the teeth of your comb, your father scrolled them into a wine glass. It bites him hard that your life happened like an hourglass with only a handful of sand, this split to the seam of his body, a split of darkness that won't kill him, but squeezes adrenaline into his veins so he leaves through the pain of your absence. He's not all right to speak. His voice rims with bereavement, and he wants to sing by your grave, child, now that birds blow songs through the window. Count sadness on the prayer beads necklaced around his collar. If he had known the sky would inhale you out of him so quickly, he would have stayed with your toes forever in his hands. Your face is still everywhere, even in the places he is not looking. He presses a deep kiss on your grave, on your forehead, hands cloudy from rubbing the grave as if on your tender skin. The distance he feels is more than the 400 kilometers that often stands between you. He will travel this far to hold you against the moon. They say you're like his reflection, pulled out of the mirror he stares into. To pull you out, he plunges his hands inside himself and pulls. The next poem that I'll read is titled Interment. Your mother's breasts swell with milk. She cups each in her hands as she delicately squeezes the warm milk through puffed up nipples into a polythene bag, paces into the yard, roots her knees to the earth, hands muddied as she digs the spot where she entombs the milk there in the place you used to play with your brother. She leans back, looks into an open sky, like one who has found a way of sending the milk across to you. The next poem I'll read is titled Marshmallow. Today, Baha is not dead. She's 6 years old, forcing marshmallow into his mouth, says, I am grown enough to feed you, Abba, with the future. That's what she calls him, just like her brother. He forces depraved cumin flowers back into their seeds. The delight is that he has pulled his shadow back into his skin to salve his wounds, and all the times he sat crying are erased, able to sidestep the void just as he wished. She is at his feet playing with his toes as though they are extension of her toys. His image of love pronounced in the way she holds on to his big toe, rubbing her finger across its nail. Grandmother says whatever he willed would become. He didn't understand until now how over the years he sat quietly until it comes loose like a smoked brick. Whenever a brick is laid, the wind dispels it. Heart exists only in blueprint. He's traveling inside grandfather's clock, arrived at the garden where Baha serves him honeycomb in her mother's teacup. 30,000 leaves are supplicating to nature. The air is pure. Not an empty cave for his child. He's drinking into the future, a transcend hope, deep inside, found by the girl in his body, the real version of himself. He thinks 6 years Baha went inside me to keep her company, and we kept growing like two trees in a sterile field, the dream of Marshmallow and my daughter is still alive. The next poem is Memory in Her Brother's Body. It's a poem that I've never read before, and when we lost our child, both my wife and I were so engrossed in our own grief that we didn't pay attention to her brother to realize that he was also grieving. This is a poem for Rehan. Baha lips in excitement, even if it's just her shadow in him. Theirs is an unrelenting story of a brother loving his sister through the void. The father remembers always waking to the sound of their giggles. That is how he knew the sun had risen. He would make a wall of pillows to keep her from falling off the cradle. They conversed in secret in a tongue held up in water. Their choice game was when she sought him out, hidden behind the bookshelf. She saw him, her eyes glittered, starry with trinkets. He had forgotten his lips on her forehead when he kissed it. They didn't know her smile glowed in the dark until he showed them with glee. The father calls her name and he answered. What remains is a blind hope that she will return home to prayers poured into him, knowing he is a pitcher that will not contain. The book is in two sections. The first section is in a voice that I call the subconscious voice that foreshadows a conversation between the daughter and the father. So I'm going to read a poem in the voice of the daughter titled Observations. There, 1. Ba, I am praying that a hummingbird hands me its ability to hover and fly backward, back into a timepiece where I am myself in the bath water you prepared. Startled that a flower doesn't bloom, I brood over the idea of bereavement, a nest egg of sorrow. Because there's an ounce of life unfolding inside my tears, there is no right way to swallow a sullen peel. There is a spark of lifelessness in the bulb that fails to bloom. I miss you cleaning the dirt in my ears, miss you wiping filth off my kneecaps, scrubbing my face, often so tenderly. Remember the day you put me to sleep on grandmother's mat? Everything I need now is inside the threadbare blankets you wrapped me in, because here my body is a flea bag where loneliness happens like a dictator. View 2. From the past, Ba, dying is like moving into a future, past the street bursting with voices of people you know. I'm a girl who looks like her father. Uku. 3. What do I know of a prayer other than it's a place where my knees root the ground and palms curve towards God like a child waiting to drink from his body? Because prayers often beget silence, I am in communion with the half-cleaved side of my melancholy. My mouth waits the puzzle in the air, where I imagine your body pillowing mine on the heels of your hands. Hudu 4. Ba, when I close my eyes, we're looking the moon in the eye, the perfect place to dream into, our bones gleaming in its dim light. Mother once dropped in my ears these words, a fantasy comes true if imagined thoroughly. Beer 5. I hear stars cracking. Perhaps you're the most tragic victim of my fantasy. From where I stand, it's easier to pull the earth closer to my forehead than to wait for my prayers to be answered.
Thank you for your patience. Please continue to hold as your call is being held in.
All right, I'll hold for a moment. Shida. I'm lacing your hair into a rope of desire, a collection of things beyond one's reach. The next poem I'll read is still a poem in the voice of the child, Baha, and it's a poem in praise of her mother. It's titled Ummi. Ummi, each time you pray, your tongue wrestle with your teeth to say the 99 names of a non-talking God that never answers when catechized to return the dead, not even when the names are tattooed behind his ears as a voice calling a stone deaf, who seemed to say, I am a bit deaf, so you'd have to speak up. If silence were a language prancing in a hand-carved wood doll, what words would the world hear? There on me. Each time sorrow weakens your knees in subdue, and the prayer you offer questions the composer instead of admonishing. There is nothing as beautiful as you weaving a wreath in praise of my body. Because your shadow is alive with grief, no air can stop your lungs for grasping for more air. When pieces of father's glues levitate like blood from skin cut open in space, you're counting years by the number of family members that have fallen into the path of earth only seen when you look into the moon. What does it mean to be outside a clock, outside its fingers? Sometimes I come to the house as a wind to ring the doorbell. When you open the door, your body is in my face. I fill my nose with your smell. If you ask me, no one deserves more praise than the hands bleeding of my absence as they mix Play-Doh for my brother, or as they construct cardboard papers into houses no one could live in, beside the memory you stuck into making them. If silence were a language prancing out of a shadow's mouth, what would be heard in your muffled prayers, anointed with a tinge of your ire? I know you often blame yourself, but death wasn't in your breast milk, nor inside anything you fed me. You wonder if God hears your voice. Ummi, I hear you. I'd read two more poems. Here's a poem for my mom. When we lose people, our loved ones try to console us, and sometimes it's just silence that we want. There's a poem that speaks to one of such moments. Waterlog. When mother whispered, "What doesn't kill you?" I replied, "Turns me into a living corpse." I am the spitting image of my shadow, a face absorbed into a night aching from what has been ripped off. I am fluent in my silence. What transpires after stars collapse? What happens if the dead turn into trees coiled into the passage of time, blabbering about its inadequacy to erase existence? The agony is a silent war in my body. Each time I open my mouth to speak, inhaling more pain that jam-packs my lungs like a riot ground. Come into my foxhole with eyes that see what others can't. Let's shadow each other. I would collect the light that leaked into the Passion River. My eyes are a window, waterlogged with tears. I cannot see anything other than what frightens me. I am living off my fear. How do I consent to joy? If it's a currency, what can it buy? All I want is to crawl away from a house built in perpetuity for grief, with corners spidered with longing, pain, and tears. My tongue inside a keyhole cannot unlock the door. And the last poem that I would read is the last poem in the book, written to commemorate with the first anniversary of her passing, 1 year after. Today is a year since the earth opened its mouth to the size of your body and swallowed. Like a ghost, I am learning to walk the earth without my body. Regret, a rosary wrapped around my wrist, leads me away from the universe's favor. If death is truly everywhere on earth, where could I have hidden you from its grasp? Perhaps behind a star that shines every 500 years, the shaft of sorrow like sunlight striking the ground where I stand. God knows that I am not perfect, but I found the pearl in loving you. Each time in the swirling vapor of love, I hold you, blended into the rainbow, marking its body across the skyline. The world stops spinning. Instead, A bubble grows over it, and time cannot exert itself on us. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Saddiq. That was beautiful. And as a reminder, all of the poet's books are available through the folks at Woodland Pattern. It is my great pleasure to introduce Tabile Makwe, who is a South African healer and writer. They were the 2016-17 current State of Poetry National South African Slam champion. Their debut collection, Mama Seko, was released in 2020 through the African Poetry Book Series of the University of Nebraska Press. Their work has been included in multiple journals, as well as in 2035 Africa, an anthology of contemporary poetry, and New Daughters of Africa, an international anthology of writing by women of African descent. They live in Los Angeles, where they work in transformative justice. And as a healer, channel, and teacher, please help me in welcoming Tabile.
Hi, everybody. I am so happy to be here and share some poems with you all. Thank you, Saddiq. Those were such beautiful, meticulous poems. Yeah. Okay. The first poem I'm going to read is called Maseko. My mother's name, Mama Seko, mother of tradition, mother of blood, bearer of covenant, makes me blood, makes me unbending, makes me grief, makes me black lace around neck, makes me repetition, makes me aloe, makes me burnt offering, makes me incense, makes me penance, makes me doctrine, makes me sacrament, makes me a shaved head, makes me a house, makes me law, makes me written in blood, makes me unwritten by fire, makes me never infant, makes me black night, makes me a story narrated by rocks standing to make true, makes me heavy, makes me heavy, makes me heavy. This poem is called Grandmother's Womb. My grandmother suffered a mental problem. Twice, in a jealous fit, she let the dogs out on her daughter. She said she had a wolf in her heart. 8 times the wolf in her bed watched her ravish herself. The 10th time was a niece noosed on a tree. 4 times castor bean in a cup, each time missed the boat. Almost ran out of chest, but did not run the wild thing out of body. On the radio, they said 1 daughter, but she never birthed the odd girl, never left crease on the hem or an outlying girl. A biological mishap, a swaying skirt, damp feet, knock knees, jittery within vacuum, prancing on the crook, found hanging skew from some thatch roof. My grandmother does not remember what girl this is, what face she's wearing, what snapped neck, what man found within, alleged to have trespassed, broken in, taken the silver, fractured the china. What husband, what cannibal ate this foggy-faced girl? My grandmother insists that she labored 4 feathered girls, lightweight legs for takeoff, bright wings, soft-spoken like her mother. 14 times she's heard the old footsteps, felt the flutter on her hairs, but not once has she seen this daughter. Did not even smell the carcass, did not see the dangling bones, the buzzing beast. She recalls the man, pulls him from out of her crotch, but nothing of the cold girl. My grandmother may or may not have birthed a girl and then hauled her back into her pussy. She has a mental problem, a heart problem, or a womb problem. She laid 2 eggs, has them both with a fork and knife ready in hand. She remembers vaguely the girl who went, but not the one who stayed. Remembers the man who scorned her, but not the scorn. My grandmother's daughter hangs elusive. This one is called Root Body. I know the root, the house, the mess, the bone, the body, to butter with sea, the brown and penance, the digging and dung, the libation above. I know the root, the awe and quick aberrance, the years beyond, the hands lunging, the aids, the marrow, the stress, the duty and blame and breath, knee and torso, the cleft and hunger, the birth and ruin, mother and abolition. I know the root, the children and trigger. This one is called Too Many Body. The body is many. One day is a new body, another is a resurrection. The body reincarnated from itself, a new one within the old one. Yesterday's body behind today's, each named after the one lost. The one you love is replaced by one you do not know. The one I climbed into has gone and I am purged by another. The broken one is the carcass of another. A visitor makes a body. A kiss another. Love awakens the others, and the death of one is the birth of another. A body for my blood, two for the clot, another for my mother. The name is three. A body for each one of those lost to find this country. Another for the old country, another for the border. Another is the rain. A body marks the beginning of the new year. Another remains to remind us of the old year, of the old contract, of the lost blood. The body is broken. In death, every man eats a full one to remember each body atonement, each body prayer. The body is the son, is a father giving what is not his. The cost of the body is the betrayal of memory. This body is a door swung open. At your touch, the body of endings appears to close the gates. The body is a serpent. All its heads are bodies, one to love you softly and another to eat your neck. The one that sends you away is the cleanser, comes to rid the others of their mistakes. The other is a swallow, leaping into a new country. The nomad body leaves before another is awake. The lapse is a body of sacrifice to compensate. The body is a daughter, another a sibling, another the crime, the other the law and the justice. The fight body is the flight body, and the one that remains is a terrified child, is a neurotic hand scabbing at itself, making a body of horror, a monument for the sad ones and the angry ones. The medicine body is the end body, is the poison body, is the body of completion. Come to haul all the bodies back into itself, into the void. The end body is the birth body, is the new year, is the memory, is the birth, is the tail of the snake born before the head. The old country to dig the ghost of the new, the daughter to give birth to the mother, and another, and another. These next poems are under a section called Qibla, which is Sesotho for womb, and I wrote them about my Oma or grandmother. They always felt insufficient in translation, but I wanted to write them that way anyway. This one is called Gray Mountain. My grandmother is a mountain, standing guard for her children, gray, green, brown, black, habitually distant. This one is called Sunrise. To wake is unremarkable and habitual, and indeed they did not notice their dawn come, and its joy was due not to quench the famish, but to pass by the lip, to mock the tongue, and to disappear. Moonlight. It was the moon that taught them to shapeshift on the faces of their men, to shine without all their light, to be half full and to swallow the sky. River border bosoms. The river taught them to be brown, to be thick and full of water, to be still, to run in between countries and people. And then this last one from this section is called The Purge. They were mud houses during the year of the rain, wilting, purging. This poem is called Those Hungry Girls. And I wrote it because I was actually hungry, but it was not, it wasn't a deep famished kind of hunger. It was just regular old hungry. So I wrote this poem. Look at all those hungry girls, so gorgeous, their crooked mouths of famish and cackle. What beauty, their bone breaking through to be witnessed, their tense hair like new tinsel, their hard hands and dark knees like a loose girdle. See their eyes of sorcerous starvation. It's unladylike, isn't it, to be so clearly needing? And this poem is called End Hunt. And the hunt that came upon us will not go unless we go with it. And then I wanted to read two other poems. Okay. Time is not so merciful as to undress a haunted self, as to let the wind enter, its debris be sand, be requiem, be washed at the middle. No, in time all things are mirrors. But what is time but substitution? Do not mourn the damage or misreckon with the wrinkles that form over the mistake. No, in time the appendage of ruin is the ruin. Okay. This last poem I wrote yesterday. 2 days ago, my Oma or grandmother passed away, and I wrote this poem yesterday, and it's part of processing that grief. Gentlest Oma, distant mountain, orb of my eye, house of stretched limbs, our bosom of strict milk, sweet, sweet famish. We mourn you now in this final loss as we did in the small ones. Our hands reaching and never touching you, your hands reaching but never touching him. Is he yours now? World of your parched world, horizon of your living feet, solo star of your gaze, the mortal god of your fatal worship. Do you rest your breath upon his? Exclaim how you undressed yourself of yourself. Lay your flesh aside to meet him, ghost to ghost. How you grieved us, children of your tired wanting, phantoms of hope. Foggy faces at the grasp, sweet sour apple rotting beside your tree. Will we cry until we're empty? Old remorse dried up like laughter in washed pictures. Will we cry until you are ours to lose? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Tabile. It was beautiful. Thank you. All right, next up we have Cheswayo Paza, who was born in Lusaka, Zambia, and raised in Chicago, Illinois. His work has been featured in the New England Review, the Paris Review, Hamden Sydney Review, Boston Review, a lot of reviews, Lolaway, and elsewhere. He's received fellowships from the Breadloaf Writers Conference, the Hurston Wright Foundation, Callaloo, Cave Canem, and Columbia University. A finalist for the Brunel International African Poetry Prize, a recipient of the 2017 Hurston Wright Award for College Writers, and winner of the 2020 Boston Review Annual Poetry Contest and a Creative Capital 2022 awardee. His debut collection, The Reinhardt Frames, was winner of the Sillerman First Book Prize for African Poets from APBF. He earned his MFA from Rutgers Newark and currently serves as the editor-in-chief of Lamp Black. Please help me in welcoming Cheswayo.
Hey everybody. Oh wow. This is such an honor to be here, to be in conversation with everybody here. Just thinking about the moment for African literature right now. I'm so happy to be in conversation with all of you all, and I hope to continue to grow in conversation with all of you. Thank you for your work. Let's get to these poems. The first one is The Code of Hammurabi. The Code of Hammurabi, John Lane, Lusaka, Zambia. Reading glissant makes me anxious for the body's properties, our characteristic error in defining being as human. I can't help but to think of our existence as isterids, the jaundiced ones. Take, for instance, the precarity of being witness to another's body. A man is caught stealing a bag of flour, cornmeal dust and ash covering his skin, dryness around his busted lips, bare feet, the flared ribs, his head in the position of shame, shadowed by John Lang's statue ahead, the rest of him penumbra. Hands tied behind his back with the same rope used to connect plows between cows, shirt stripped off his back, swollen bruises mapping it, two men at his side dragging him to law, the gathered crowd, even their shadows hostile, scrambling for a part of his body to well against. My young eyes resting on his back, so inanimate the body is from a distance, a well-stuffed scarecrow, his spine perfect for my blow, before a kick to the back of his knees, before my untrained jab at his ribs, my fist the size of a ripe tangerine, his pulsating body a shock in my hands to feel him as a live thing. Okay, trying to see if I should include some banter between poems. Let's just do it. Frame 2. I awoke ahead of myself. The mind roamed as a moth roams. Warm dusk had deepened into amorous darkness. Snow's echo, time raining down. Night like so many such nights I've known, I wept with bitter longing, now remembering how in my youth I cried. To have had some joys and to tenderly recall them, a way of breaking synchronistic with time, being adrift in place. Strange to see meanings that clung together once, the rush of whole lives passing elsewhere without you, how tragic the force of destiny can be, how we squander our hours of pain, how aspects of myself will be rendered. The next poem is after the Iranian filmmaker Abbas Kiarostami. Abbas Kiarostami's film Taste of Cherry, which came out in 1997. Taste of Cherry, Abbas Kiarostami, 1997. On a drive with Mr. Badi in his tan Land Rover, silence grazes our ears, leaving our mouths half open, our throats letting out smoke clearance. The roads ahead wind into Mobius strips, Mr. Badi's hands loosely grabbing the wheel. I look to the Rover's tinted windows, wondering if we appear like Schrodinger's cat to other drivers, but I know it is the ostrich syndrome holding my silence when he asked me to pour 20 spadefuls of earth in his body in a hole he dug. On the street, discreet as our intent, searching for Mr. Badi's perfect burial, the lakefront scent curls around us, retreating me to sore summers. The tension I developed against water after a friend drowned, a pack of boys tightly bound as a tin of sardines, the soda cans in brown paper bags we carried to give us the mysticism of winos, the weight of Slaughter and Son funeral home sign tugging at our collars, a death has occurred or is near. The brown and orange liquid we poured on fish combed by waves to shorelines, their bodies braised by seagull beaks, eyes sinking into their skulls. We stuffed half-lit little cigarettes inside them so their musk would not offend our noses. I don't want to give you a gun to kill me. I'm giving you a spade, Mr. Badi says. Just pretend you're farming and I am manure to spread at the foot of crops. We reach a stoplight. My eyes expand to the bus that ran over the neighbor's daughter, the mother running to scatter limbs, attempting to sew back the severed child. I stared in wonder, thinking it was possible. Retour Poetica. And there's an epigraph from the French symbolist Stéphane Mallarmé from, I believe it was an essay, Crisis in Poetry. The epigraph is, it is not description which can unveil the efficacy and beauty of monuments, seas of the human face in all their maturity and native states, but rather evocation, illusion, suggestion. Retour Poetica. Considering modern poetry, I look to my garden. Outside my window, the snout butterfly feasts on my flowers while approaching the end of its fortnight, staining its wings with the pollen of perennials and phlox. Not the butterfly's beauty I marvel at, but how it comprehends its dimming hours, the skill in living. The flowers know something about this, how beauty is of dissonance to the sentimental, the poet's voice still and absent, understanding the ethereal nature of the line's breath, its inconclusive possibilities, aside from our abuse of his frame and projections on the page, conflating affect as a key for craft. The poem is a pure thing. Each writer finds a new entrance into the mystery. Each line, melody, its strands concocting their own cadences, meaningful folds, slight tears at the seams, how a line can be naked without being explicit. We torpedoes from monocots, put them between our lips and press secrets into them. The images were dream, to build the voice as an individual instrument, to fashion a new air where breath becomes superfluous. I'm anxious about time, so I'm always like, okay, am I reading too much?
You're
But
good.
hey, it's for Africa. We gotta go all the way, right?
You're all good.
Shout out to all my Africans. You too, Ariana. Let's go to the Congo. This one is in memoriam of Patrice Lumumba. Open casket body double for Patrice Lumumba's funeral. By slipping into the snug position of the casket, I finally understood the idiom flirting with death and the absurdity of calling myself human. I felt the appropriate scars I placed on my body, hacksaw marks like a collar around my neck, and full bullet holes I imagined deepened by the same sulfuric acid that left ant tunnels cutting through Lumumba's bones. Here I was as a body to contain Lumumba as myth and certainty, to resurrect him from an unknowable burial. At the start of the wake, I could feel Pauline's face staring hard, her tears streaming. I tried not to move, tasting salt in her tears. I wanted to speak to her as Lumumba, tell her I had fabricated a letter on the lavender handkerchief stuffed in my front shirt pocket, and how it made me think of the manila envelope I kept a manuscript of poems in labeled Freedom Papers. I wanted to tell Pauline I knew of our bare-breasted march in Leopardville, the death of our daughter I was not allowed to mourn. Breaking protocol, I whispered in Pauline's ear to read my handkerchief, to ignore its stains, but to bear the contents smudged in silk. That is when Pauline laid her hands on my face, bent her body over, and wailed. How then could I resist holding her? My beloved companion, I write you these words, not knowing whether you will receive them, when you will receive them, and whether I will still be alive when you read them. The snapdragon flowers I picked out for you should have come as an omen when I saw how their seed pods look like skulls. I write to you from the great beyond, Pauline, this letter a small excerpt of my heart. You never knew about that night in Katanga. No one was to know of the firing squad, the axes gnashing through cartilage, cracking like dry wood, and the acidic bath to dissolve me. Foolish me who thought this body was not ephemeral for the Belgians. How I never learned to compromise with this existence as eternity. I write to you thinking of our youth, the tenderness that grips me when I help put on your earrings, young lovers bruising each other's necks with kisses. Here I was thinking I was a monolith in the world, then in stumbles you reducing me to my most ordinary. I were promenading in Kinshasa as Evoules, me selling bottles of La Pola in one hand, and years later drafting Le Fondamental. The drowned out echoes of our promises for this country, its right to an honorable life, to perfect dignity, to independence with no restrictions, the irreparable debt we will forever be owed. Yes, I too made mistakes, the privations of my love I at times kept from you, which helped me understand what makes a man a dictator is the same as his need for freedom, a facsimile of that which has conquered him. I want our children whom I leave behind to be told that the future of the Congo is beautiful. All of these things I can't shake free, like who will water the garden, grease Julian's scalp, and braid her hair into pigtails with neon pearls dangling. Do not wait for me, my companion. History will have its day one day. And I think I'm gonna read two more. It's funny, I got a notification on my calendar that the anniversary of my father's death is coming up. And I forgot, I was like, oh, he did die on May 4th. Okay. So In thinking about grief and the violence of colonialism and its erasure of the Black body, I'm gonna read David Livingstone's statue. Shouts to Simeon. This is also for you in some way. A David Livingstone statue for Henry Mphanza. And there's an epigraph by one of the chiefs from Zambia who was recorded saying this for the Telegraph. We have changed a great many of our colonial place names since independence, but we have kept the name of Livingstone out of a deep respect. At the onset of my ingenious plan, the sun barely shone through the mist. I struggled with the name to identify the rushes of water pouring beside me, half of my tongue saying, Mosi Artanya, the smoke that thunders, the other saying, Victoria Falls. And here is my complex. To shred the palace of English lodged on my tongue is sheer civility. Restraining all languages, I snuck past 2 olive sheen security guards sleeping underneath the shade of banana leaves to find Livingstone's bronze body, to which I snickered, Dr. Livingstone, I presume. My hand ran across the chiseled letters inscribed across his body. What I read gathered all that was lost in me, including the anger and sadness I learned as a birthright. I come neither as saint nor sinner. I'm prepared to go anywhere, provided it be forward. And maybe more than this was the lush grin I imagined so carefully plastered on his face, taunting history beyond the grave. The recordings of his barren solitude heated by poisonous winds, his treks through the wild jungles infested by snakes and only roamed over by few scattered tribes of untamable barbarians. I thought of my father's unmarked grave, my weekly visits to graveyards in Lusaka, imagining his body belonging to each bed covered with grass, small cracked rocks gathered by children to form an altar. My slow words grafting epithets against airy headstones. I laid on graves imagining my father's funeral and a decent headstone to give my name an origin. I bet he was buried in a bed of blues. There must have been wailers, the pangs of mothers, women in droves moaning, singing low songs, repenting the grave and its folding soils. Chitangas were worn, screams buried in slow groans, incantations moaned, grave dances surrounding the caskets, limbs moaning lost songs, folk tales and fables. The sun brushing light on their rags, time they held. My father's hand I wish I could have held, rusted past and dreams shaking in his palms. It's the same sadness I carry when I think of Lumumba's exhumed and dissolved body, Pauline left to mourn the imagination of him, locating a compass of wounds, our absence as fitting effigies for caskets. It was then I reached into the duffel bag where I'd been hoarding the mason jars of piss to shudder against Livingstone's bronze cast face, the small hammer I brandished to crack the bronze until I heard a wailing inside. History's vows may be, and I was left to my own undoing where I thought of the savagery of monuments, the emptiness of burying one's flag, our profound yet hollow depths in graves where we can't locate our names. And then fast little sweet one, fast little sweet one for Romeo to come through and do Romeo's thing. Frame 12. Everything has form. Dusk with its desperate colors of erasure, the hollow, unearthly hour of night, the lullaby of shadows unleashing arduous, scintillating silences, the flavors of tongues, apertures. I've imagined it all in the stretched out ends our lives make. I am an addict of the human comedy, the very dirge, the luster of something. This is my other heritage, to forget the impossible weight of being human, to settle into the flesh of our futures.
Thank you, Cheswayo. That was beautiful. All right, next up, Romeo Oriogun, Nigerian poet and essayist, is the author of Sacrament of the Bodies, a finalist for the Lambda Award for Gay Poetry. He's received fellowships and support from Harvard University's Hutchins Center for African and African American Research, the Oregon Institute for Creative Research, and the IIE Artist Protection Fund. An alumnus of the Iowa Writers Workshop, he currently lives in Ames, Iowa, where he is a postdoctoral research associate at Iowa State University. Please help me in welcoming Romeo.
It's kind of like a blessing to just watch you guys read. I could just stay and listen to you people just read all day. But yeah, I think Kwame is also a prophet in a way, because he kind of like rearranged the order of things. And if I were to go first, I definitely would have missed this because I've been on the road traveling to Iowa City. But anyway, let's get into poems. So I'll start with reading Elegy for a Bond Friend. Because the night is silent, the trees will search for a voice. The wind will fill a body with sorrowful songs. Forgive me. I drank old wine as a mob marked your body. There is nowhere to say enough, nowhere to breathe in the open sea without salt stinging your throat, nowhere to wash our body in water and become free. There was mockery on the spot where your hand touched the blood on your shirt. The voice said, "You're falling ashes, a mirror of something unnatural, the dark side of God." This was the point my mouth should have poured water over your burning skin. Forgive me. There was a pipeline so close to another man. There was a fire burning nearby. And I ran into a dark street where I called your name in silence and said, "Leave," knowing people like us will always be haunted. I remember the night you licked the salt in my palm and said, "Do not be afraid to live in your skin." Maybe you knew. You knew one day your scream would stretch my throat and my silence will break out of a darkness hard as a wall. The second poem I want to read is called The Guilt of Exile, which is a poem I kind of like the last poem of the book and something I've been thinking about seriously ever since. The Guilt of Exile. In Cafe Pamplona, I sat down to write about my first Pride March. I can't recall the music I danced to, but my shirt still smelled of the girl who hugged me and said, "I am a Christian, I'm sorry, forgive me." On the train home, I broke down in tears as a friend commented on my picture, "Your freedom is the hope I seek." I do not know if I still have permission to speak up of fear. There was a cup of coffee on my table, and a couple shouted, "Happy Pride." Every night, I reach for home and fail. What is freedom if a million people still walk with the fear of being seen? And the next one I'd read is called My Tinder Date Speaks of Fruits, which the poem I wrote in Boston. I think when I came to the US, I was like naive the way relationships work. I was like, yeah, I'm free, being bisexual. I was like, yeah, I don't think people would have anything against me. And the reverse was the case. So there's always one runs to poetry to understand life. So this was a poem I wrote to understand that encounter. My Tinder date speaks of fruits. I have never been afraid to place a bowl of fruit on the tongue of a river. If this is how a son pleases a mother, then call me good. Call me the light that refuses the allure of the night. My goddess is what inhabits the bottom of the sea. Say, this is a better way to hide. The girl behind the wheel laughed when she spoke of queer boys. She said, Haiti knows how to kill boys that are too soft. She said, on this street in Boston, fruits walk with swinging buttocks. All they want is a man for the night. She asked, why are you not laughing? The boy at the back began a story with the broken bones of queer boys. He said at Atlanta, we beat up some fruits the night we had some rum at the club. We fucked them up. We say be gay, but don't slice through the day to show us. I opened a hole in his back to bring out my mouth. I am bisexual and Black. I was born between two cities in a river without language. When my aunt speaks to me on the phone, her voice sounds like a translation. I am without proverbs to be Yoruba. I am without courage to be Benin. What hides me is what pushes me away. I envy everything with a home. Do you know the best death is by a door? At least what doesn't call you son will bury you. What I am is an empty body, a song without a sound. I own no place to call love. In church, a pastor said, heaven is home for whoever throws the first stone, meaning God sanctioned the cutlass to know the test of blood, meaning every son disowned for what shouts under his skin is without God. And everywhere I'm called sin, I seek to be free. Before Brookline, she dropped me by the roadside, gave me the finger and drove away. I turned to the wind, to waters without form, and this too is how the earth becomes home for a body creating a room from every rejected breath. I think I would read two poems from this collection, and then APBF is home, and I'm fortunate that they'll be publishing my next collection next year. So I want to read 2 or 3 poems from that. So, yeah. So this is Goodbye, and it's written for Jepta, who was someone I knew back home, and then exile, and then falling away. So I have forgotten the feeling of pain leaving a body, the way the hand waved goodbye, as if walking into what won't leave it whole. Maybe that's why sad songs leave us empty. Maybe that's why I didn't complain after you poured tea into my cup about its sweetness. Because even when living, love is still sharp enough to bleed a man to death. I touched your hand, not knowing the gift I had touched. I let it go, not knowing what it is I had let go. I watched you smile, not knowing what was dying. The distance between us stretched to Minna, and I searched for you as the car stopped by the city wall, the way a man searches for air and fails. I searched for you in the language of blood and sand that this place was built upon. Every lean man in a kaftan walking toward me felt like you, but you were not there. I know in every language there's a hole that a word cannot fill, and I have hid you there, knowing the gift I had lost, knowing you're so fragile, knowing a man must love a word so much to give it a new name to fill the hole on his tongue. I think in a certain way, since I came to the US, I've been writing poems about exile, and this is one of them that somehow bleed into the next collection. So I'll end on this one and just read 3 poems from the other collection. In this called Exile, there is a gift I was given, a horse with its broken legs. Lord, I tend to this brief thing called life, like a man caring for a beast that eats what it loves. I can't help this loneliness of people walking away from my eyes. It is how a city knows its walls have fallen. The plane breaks through the cloud and San Juan comes into view. This city should survive this water, I say. Once I knew where my circle was in the world. I could walk into forest with just a book and find my way back to my mother's chest. I should tell you, my mother's chest was a tree. Beside it, a flower blossomed and was called Grace. I should tell you, I once saw the river drown a bone, and maybe this is death, and maybe this is a mother welcoming a son. The driver says welcome, and I know he means stranger. I know he means what drives you into the world. I have come here to find home. I have come here to find what I'd lost, but it will spit me out. A seed floating on water, a boat, a life without the lock of trees. The city stretches into a fort as if it is still ready for war, as if a battleship sits eternally before our eyes. I have known this fear. It is called reaching into the future for the cuts, meaning I still see the men who called me homo, men in debt, men in sin, meaning their hands shall divide my body into a barren field. I once woke up to the beast in my chest cage. I held it tenderly before severing its neck. My therapist called it a sacrifice, meaning I saw the blood even in the dark. I smelled it and knew home drowned last night. Father, here is what I was given, a goat, the beauty to walk back to the knife, the man saying grace as if blood isn't pure enough, and the city. Here at night, I'll walk into anything that calls me home, and it will hold me for a while. I have seen my mother's bed this way. The burgundy color of the bed sheets, the walls with old photographs, her skin. Yeah, my mother is alive. She's my city, and I hold her close. Mother, stay with me for a while. Stay before the sea comes to wash us clean of our tests. Yes, so somehow I've been kind of like curious about what binds us together as Black people, like, and it's so fascinating to see that we share almost the same terror of whether it's colonialism or whether slavery. There's that divide of, you know, empires separating us. But what I also find is that we also share so much wonder and so much things, especially music. I have been listening to a lot of music, and I find that there's this very fascinating way in which indigenous music kind of like binds us. And so there's this music genre of music called Gombe from Guinea-Bissau, which was introduced by a French Guadeloupe band, which went back, and the band, I think it's Kazakh, and it's something that was like derived from like the music of the Maroons of Jamaica, and somehow it has become the kind of like the national music of Guinea-Bissau. You know, and listening to it one time, I started thinking about what it means, that there are things that kind of like unites us, and I was fascinated by that. So I wrote this poem called "The Wonder of Bissau." There is nothing beauty cannot hide, says Alfontaine, and truly the dust of this place covers the footsteps of the past. Its music weaves Creole through the harmonica, the benediction of trumpet, through a dance hall where a man is dancing to the gumbe passed down from the Maroons of Jamaica, mimicking the sudden movement of a spooked steer, the elegy of survival where for a brief moment the body loses, then mourn the gift of wonder. In the man's dance lies our gratitude to time, the way it leads us into the remembrance of astonishment, allowing us to stand on the shore of our lives. It is true, all across the borders of the Geba River, we are all connected to the roots of trees. And here in the streets of Bissau, just like in the rainforest of Irue, where a tree burned for coal is an ancestor dying within me, the daylight dims at the eyesight of an old man. The winds slash across the land, howling like a goat being dragged to sacrifice. And side by side of the road, children play a game of tag despite the warning of thunder, the hurry of boats to shore. Despite the liquor woman pouring gin on the earth, a prayer to the soul of windstorm. Have mercy, Papa, have mercy, she says. In all of these, the man in the dance hall kept dancing, his hands now mimicking the movement of a cutlass, the movement of freedom fighters as they ran into the madness of every colonial struggle. And I, who have known the span of a trance, the celestial music of Christ, I must forsake the Lord and partake in this boisterous sound of blood, this rhythmic stamp of feet on the chest of our buried ancestors. And even though the smell of Portugal still fills the air, the smell of men whose forts lie in Bissau Velho, staring at us like masters, gazing at feet in the evening of their lives. Where do I stand in the gaze of old colonial empires, places whose weep still touches the darkness of my future? Where do I find peace in the poverty of our continent? Once I searched for answers. I walked until I saw little houses that lined the road, touching the sea, seeking what the river seeks in the ocean, the bewilderment that comes from the rupture of spaces. I have sought this too, wandering in blue waters where my ankles were covered in the rituals of life. And all around me, there were palm frond, cow dungs, and the wild pigs that came to lay their test in the sea, drinking salt water. From the sea, I saw the procession of a funeral, masquerade mourning the dead with dance, the free flow of beer and rice, and a man standing before water like a prophet before his flock, saying to departure, blessed are the dead whose bodies will travel past the coves, the garden of sadness. Blessed are the dead who saw independence, for they shall know not the sweet fall of post-colonial gains, the bellowing of guns, the meddling of empires. I do not know if the dead are weighed down by a flag, a constitution. I do not know if the dead has an anthem. And although as I watched the day became night, I knew I'll keep searching for home, past the beauty of the sea where the dead were buried. I'll wait on the winds of revolution. And in my search, the gombe kept playing, bringing the Caribbean to the lips of those whose mouths have been burnt with history. I think I'll just read one poem. So this college begins with love. And it was a poem I wrote in Accra. We just came back from a fishing village that's close to Chaswayo, and it was fascinating and also very sad to see like people were drowning. But there was this like appreciation for life that I left there with, and kind of like became this poem. It begins with love. In the fishing village, a man whispers, let nobody bloated and gone find its way to my boat. He gives thanks to the wild, to the ant running from his sandals, to the vulture standing over the roadkill. Romeo, the day begins with love, I tell you. After a long night, after the rain, after the sleep of hibiscus, the world opens its hands to sunlight. There is time for everything. For the child down the street struggling with his clarinet, for the laborer kissing his wife's belly, for the newborn saying color. It begins with love, I tell you, even prayers. And I have stood in the middle of a field amidst the gaze of antelopes. I have prayed for thunder, a rod on my head. I, who lived for 10 months without a friend, whose soul fears the world so full of love, so full of loneliness. I have panicked, wondering if to hold a drowned body is to hold a part of myself. And from across the open field, we hear it, a fisherman's rescue call, another body washed out the river, we run toward it. It begins with love, I tell you, even burial, the hand covered with sand, a crown of seaweed. I walk to him, a song leaves me, Omi, spare us in death, spare us in life. In the strangeness of villages, I suffer. What else is there to do? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Romeo, Cheswayo, Tabile, Saddiq. That was beautiful. We have a few minutes left, and I'd love to open up some questions for the audience if folks have them. And I'm also happy to dive in and ask questions myself, but if anybody has any questions, and I do want to give a quick shout out, of course, to Kwame Dawes, who is here, and to one of our other stellar, brilliant thinkers, writers, and fellow APBF editor, John Keane, who is also with us. But I don't know if anyone has any questions. If not, I'm happy to kick things off. Well, let me kick things off. So one of the things I really love about hearing all of your works side by side is the way that you show a kind of really incredible aesthetic breadth of your generation of African poets. There's a very different engagement with craft happening in each of your works, but there's some really interesting kind of interlocking themes that exist in many forms of poetry, certainly. But one of the things I'm curious about, all of you presently find yourselves in diaspora from different realities, circumstances, and so on. And all of your works engage in some kind of conversation with the notion of distance, with some element of longing in some cases. Romeo, you use the word exile. All of you are engaging that in some way. And I'm wondering if any of you are interested to speak to that a little bit, what it means to find yourselves in a diasporic state, in a conversation with one another, and with others, of course, not just African poets, but African American and other poets from across the world within this kind of American space that you presently find yourselves in. I'm wondering if any of you are interested to speak to that a little bit.
I'll take a crack at it. Longing and distance. I've been having a lot of, I guess, meta realizations regarding what it means to love a country constructed around a violent imagination of the country. And as I'm working towards an album right now, inshallah, as I'm working towards an album, one of the things I'll be contending with Zambia is what is the reverence that I'm showing to Zambia as a nation state, as opposed to what is the reverence that I'm showing to Zambia as a locality for my lineage, my heritage. So I think it's very important for me, my work, that I'm not romanticizing, being sentimental as to what Africa, the continent, what Zambia means, but more so about the various losses across the continent. So I'm writing into various African countries. I'm writing to various writers across the African continent. Jean-Joseph Rabevelo, Christopher Kigbo, and filmmakers as well as Jubio Diomambeti, Usman Seben, Medhando, etc. So I think for me, it's very important to be in conversation with the people that have been more or less forced to occupy constructions of what these African countries are.
African.
I think it's that's I don't know. I think distance, there's this clarity that distance has given me in a certain way to not just only engage home, but also to kind of like engage the African space itself. So when I left home, I didn't just come to the US. I lived in Accra for a while and moved around different African or West African countries. And I think what that allowed me to like move into, it's to a tradition that follows you wherever you go. Because I remember being in Bamako and around the space of local musicians what kind of griots, and they were playing music, and it was kind of like fascinating to see them talk about where they come from. And sometimes it's not even in Mali itself. Some of them came from Senegal, and to be accepted in that space and allowed to share part of their soul was something fascinating for me. And so when I came to the US, it was something I really wanted to first of all cultivate, which is looking at the Black space beyond just America itself, and look at it around the world and ask myself what Black poets are writing about, especially poets of my generation, but also poets older. Because I find out that sometimes we just say things in new ways. And so it's beautiful to read those people who've said it, who've already said it, and find ways to be in conversation with them. So there's a way in which I find that that kind of conversation has kept me grounded. That even if I live here and write from here, I almost imagine myself as if I'm sitting kind of like around the round table of Black poets around the world, and being in conversation with them, and then try to see what comes out of that kind of rupture into like a language that's mine, but also a language that pays homage to people writing now, and then to people who have come before me. So in a way, I think it has kind of like tethered me home. And then it has also kind of given me this freedom to explore, to like fall into this language that doesn't have to do with, it doesn't have to do in a way with being Nigerian, so to speak. Because in a way, I don't, like, unfortunately, I don't speak Yoruba, but I understand the tradition. But to not speak a language also means to be cut off in a certain way. And so I feel like by engaging like this plethora of voices, it kind of like bridges that cut and allow me to also be rooted in a tradition that I was born and brought up in. So yeah.
I think like Romeo talk about distance and the way that distance has given me proximity to Africa and Nigeria especially, that I didn't have when I was living in Nigeria, and I'm fascinated by that. And even the way that distance just seemed to repair my relationship, with people, like just the connection that I now have with the culture, with the food, this ever-present longing for that, things that I have taken for granted. Now I see, and when I speak to people back home, and they're like, oh well, like you've got this, you've got. I'm like, yeah, I just need Nigerian chicken. That's my greatest problem right now. And I have had, it's a blessing to be pulled away from home in a way that you begin to reflect about your place in the world and your connection to that home. When I arrived here, I started asking different questions. My relationship to Islam, began seeing Islam also as a tool of colonization and the rupture that it's created in our culture, the way that we've lost ourselves, our names. I'm Saddiq, and the idea of a kind of dual colonization that northern Nigeria suffered, but which is not really articulated in the study of the history of Nigeria. And yeah, it's something that I'm still walking through and beginning to write about. I did a poem, and I received calls from home. They're like, what are you doing? You've been Americanized. Because like I begin to ask questions and have just honest conversation about what that the Arab culture has done to our own indigenous culture, and in ways that we're not thinking about it as also a tool of colonization, which also celebrate the ethos of another society to the detriment of our own. So yeah, I think in that way, distance has given me clarity to examine myself in that way.
I feel like I always had a feeling of displacement or homelessness, distance from home, that was very urgent. It felt very urgent, wanted me to do something about it or address it in South Africa. um, a deep understanding that I did not have the ability to possess or be possessed by my country while I was there. And even in the ways that I grew up and what family looked like for me was not very grounded. So I don't know how to explain it. Like I didn't feel a tangible sense of belonging. So it was more urgent. The feeling of displacement felt more urgent, heavier. And then when I moved, I feel like it got more blunt. There's nothing to do about it. I'm too far, I feel like, to address feeling the distance. So in a way, I feel like being far from home has made the displacement easier to live with. I feel like because I am a healer and I, in my spiritual practice, feel very connected to my ancestors and my guides, that I feel tethered to a part of my country that feels very spiritual. So it's not grounded in the form, in country as place, but more a different essence of country, as lineage, as understanding, as spiritual insight. And I feel able to access that more so now, because I think I've needed deeper exploration and deeper spiritual practice to access it from away. I also moved here in 2019, and so it was just the year before the pandemic, and I spent most of the pandemic in deep solitude, which really forced me to find different ways of connection, different ways of dialogue that wasn't in form and wasn't in conversation. Yeah.
Thank you. We've got just a few minutes left. If others have some questions, we'd love to hear from you. Do any of you have questions for each other? I can keep going, but I'm going to ask these very broad questions that are going to take us well into the night. But I'm wondering.
I think broad is good. Broad questions are good.
Kwame, do you have anything?
No, I'm just moved by the thoughtfulness that you guys are bringing to this this practice, to what you're doing, the specificity of it, but just incredible thoughtfulness. And because this stuff is complicated, right? It's really, really complex. And I think I'll just say something quite honest, that I think what makes your work so, to use Tabile's word, the urgency of it, is because you are desperate to find language for like really tough stuff, like tough ideas and concepts and so on. And I'm full of incredible admiration for that you're trying to do that. You're trying to find language to make this work, and it's coming through beautifully. So I just all I can say is that I think I've always been feeling that we are in a moment, and there's a lot of noise around poetry, who is this and who, but what the work you're doing is this incredible spiritual, intellectual work and artistic work of beauty. And so it's been great listening and just watching you guys and paying attention to the work. And you're part of an army of people who are trying to find language, trying to make language do something. So that's all I got. I don't have a question. And I think the absence of a question is not a problem. It's not a problem.
Yeah, I agree. And we are about out of time anyhow, but I want to reiterate that too. I think that grappling, that there's something at stake for each of you, I think is really, it is urgent and it's important and it's necessary. And it's often, I will say, missing on the contemporary literary landscape, where I don't know that people are necessarily grappling for something at stake that is this complicated, that is this essential to one's centering of their own humanity in some way. And I think it comes across so gorgeously in each of your works. And I deeply appreciate this as well. So yeah, perhaps we can leave it there and thank the good folks at Woodland Pattern for hosting us and giving us the space to come together. And of course, thank you to all of you for sharing your works.
This has been an incredible honor. It's just, I'm full of poetry and of everything that you've given to us this evening. Thank you, Kwame. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you to all four of you brilliant poets. And again, come to woodlandpatternbookcenter.com and then pick up all the work that you can from these writers. And I hope to see you all in person. It would be lovely to do that sometime. And thank you for joining us this evening. And thank you for putting this together. Appreciate you so much. And take care.
Thank you all. Be well.